Okay, everyone. Hello and welcome. This is the Preparing for Your Administrative Review webinar. Today is Thursday, November 16th, 2023. We are presenting this webinar to school food authorities who are up for an administrative review in the 23-24 school year in the state of New Mexico. So you are here because you've been notified that you are getting an administrative review this school year. So on behalf of the New Mexico Public Education Department, CN Resource is going to be conducting that review for you. My name is Claire Grodin, and I, along with Catherine Rippey, will be presenting today. We are recording this webinar, so it will be made available to you all afterwards. We will have time at the end for questions, so please hold any questions till the end. You can also put questions in the chat. We will be compiling a question and answer, and we'll send it out to everyone after this. All right, so today's agenda. So first we'll go over who is CNR. We'll give you a brief introduction to CN Resource and what we do. We'll introduce you to the NSLP team, so who does what. We'll go over what is an administrative review, so a brief explanation of the USDA review process. We'll go over our review process and timeline here at CN Resource. We'll go over how to prepare. So we'll give you an overview of each review area, the documents that are going to be needed, and how you can start to prepare now. And then we'll go over communication. So how can CN Resource help you throughout this review process? We know for a lot of you, this may be your first administrative review. It may be, it's been a long time since your last administrative review. So we want to let you know that we are here to, guide you through this review process. So any questions, we are here to help you. All right, so who is CN Resource? So CN Resource contracts with state agencies all over the country to assist with USDA administrative reviews. Our team is made up of registered dietitians, CPAs, former food service directors, former state agency staff. And it's a group of people that really care about the work that you're doing and have been in your shoes before. So CN Resource, our mission is this. CN Resource exists to promote responsible oversight of federal nutrition programs through system expertise, thoughtful and caring employees, forward-looking customer service, and an overall concern for the health and well-being of America's children. So as you can see, there's a map on the screen. All of the states highlighted in yellow are the states that we have contracts with currently. And we're really looking forward to working with the New Mexico sponsors and having a successful review year. All right, so the CN Resource team is the NSLP side is led by 3 directors. So we have Kendra, who's the NSLP director. She oversees, all of the state contracts. We have Jacqueline, who's the director of process management and improvement. And her job is really ensuring that reviews are being completed by the USDA and state requirements. And then we have Catherine, who is the director of financial reviews. USDA has really increased their focus of the review of financial management within school lunch programs. So we've established a team of specialists that's led by Catherine to ensure compliance and ensure comprehension in these areas as well. As you can see at the top of the screen, there's a whole list of other team members, contract coordinators, contract support specialists, senior review specialists. You're not expected to know who all these people are, but they all do play a role in this administrative review process. The one person on that list that you will need to know about is the senior review specialist. This is the person that has been assigned, each sponsor has been assigned a senior review specialist. So they will be your main point of contact at CN Resource throughout the entire review process. So we'll go over the senior review specialist role in the next couple slides, and when you'll get in touch with them. All right, so the administrative review, this is an assessment of the School Food Authority's administration of the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, and other school nutrition programs. So this is a USDA mandated review, and it's a comprehensive evaluation of your school meal programs. The administrative review is split into 3 parts. So first is program operations, where we look into benefit issuance, claims, civil rights, wellness policies, professional standards. The second piece is finance and purchasing. So this is the resource management and procurement part of the review. We're looking at things like paid lunch equity, your nonprofit food service account, your non-program food revenue, and supporting documentation. And then last but not least is meal service. So this portion of the review entails a menu review as well as an on-site meal observation. So this portion of the review is to ensure the correct meal components and portion sizes are being served, that meals are being counted and claimed correctly, and that meals are being counted at the point of service. This part of the review also has looks at the food safety practices within your kitchens. Okay, so this is just an overview of the CN Resource Administrative Review process. So over the next couple weeks, each of you will be receiving what's called an introduction call. This introduction call will be with your assigned senior review specialist. Like I said, your senior review specialist will be your main point of contact throughout the entire review process. During this call, you'll go over your specific on-site review date, specific details about your school, and you'll go over initial steps in the administrative review process. Once that call is complete, you'll receive your official notification letter, and that will include all the details about your administrative review, all the important due dates. This will also include a comprehensive documentation checklist, which will just be an overview of all the documentation that we will need from you as part of the review process. About a week after the introduction call, you'll have what's called the financial call, and this is scheduled with your senior review specialist as well as one of our financial specialists. And during this call, you complete the preliminary financial review questions. And we do recommend that whomever handles the financials at your school for your school lunch program, they should be present on this call as well. So during the weeks between your introduction call and the on-site review, you'll be organizing and uploading documentation for the review. Like I said, you'll receive a comprehensive documentation checklist with your notification letter that will let you know exactly what needs to get uploaded. All documentation will be uploaded to the New Mexico Public Education Department Administrative Review System. You all should have access to this system. If you do not have access, please reach out to Rochelle DeQuarto at the state. I will drop her contact information in the chat, but she is the one that can get you access to the administrative review system. You will need access to this because this is where the entire administrative review will be happening and where you will upload all the documentation for the review. So when we are done with the presentation, I'll put her contact information in the chat. Actually, and while I'm thinking of it, I am just going to put it in right now for you all. So hold on 1 second, so I don't forget. Okay, so once you've uploaded all your documentation and the offsite review has been completed, you will have your on-site review. So this is when your reviewer will come on site and they'll review program operations and meal service. And then upon completion of the on-site review, the sponsor will receive a report with any identified findings from the review. Then you will provide responses to the findings to bring your program into compliance. Once all of your finding responses have been approved, this is when your administrative review will be closed out. Okay, so for the remainder of the presentation, we are going to look at specific parts of the review. And what we're going to go over is what exactly we're looking at, what documentation you will be expected to provide, and then how you can start preparing now. So the first area we're going to look into is certification and benefit issuance. And this is for those standard claiming sites. Now I know New Mexico is doing universal free meals this year, which is awesome. But it is important to note that standard claiming sites, even though students are all eating for free, you still need to be collecting free and reduced applications because students need to be claimed at their determined eligibility status. So students are still getting meals free of charge. But they still need to be claimed at the point of service at their eligibility status. So this is just a really important point that the state wanted us to discuss. So as part of the certification and benefit issuance review, we're looking at your determination process. So how do you determine free and reduced eligibility? We're also looking at eligibility determinations. So did you correctly determine free and reduced eligibility? And then we're looking at benefit issuance. So are you able to correctly count meals accordingly to a child's free or reduced or paid eligibility? The documentation that we are looking for are rosters or master lists, so that benefit issuance list, direct certification and match results, household income applications, extended eligibility, homeless, migrant, runaway, and foster lists, and then notification letters. So how you can start to prepare now is make sure you have all the proper officials in place. So who's doing what? Do you have assigned hearing officials, determination officials, and verification officials? Look over the applications that you have on file for the school year. Double check them for completeness and accuracy. Make sure they're completely filled out. And then look over your benefit issuance list and make sure that it's up to date. The next piece is verification. So verification is the confirmation of free and reduced eligibility. So the USDA allows free and reduced applications to be taken at face value. So whatever the household puts down as their income, you accept that. But verification was put in place so sponsors have a way to check that information to make sure that what's being reported on the application is accurate. So when we are looking at the verification, we're looking at your process. So how did you complete the verification process? We're looking at your verification results. So how did you, what did you do as a result of the verification? And then verification reporting. Did you correctly report your verification activities to the state? Documentation that we'll be looking for are the applications selected for verification, notification and results letters. So we want to see those letters notifying the household that they've been selected for verification. And then if eligibility changes as a result of the verification process, we want to see those letters informing the household that their eligibility has changed. And then documentation collected from the family, and then the verification report. So how you can start to prepare now, again, check your officials, who's doing what. Note those error-prone applications. So the error-prone applications are those applications where the income is very close to the income eligibility limit. So when you're selecting applications for verification, you just want to make sure you're pulling from that error-prone application pool first. Review the applications and verification file. Does it tell a story from start to finish? So we, as the reviewer, if we picked up that verification file, would we be able to follow along and see what happened? And then check for signatures. Just make sure that the application has that verification official signature on the free and reduced application. All right, so community eligibility provision. So this only applies to our CEP sponsors. So when we are looking, reviewing CEP schools, we're looking at that identified student percentage. So what is the ISP? Was it correctly determined? We're looking at meal claiming. So is the identified student percentage correctly applied to meal counts? And then documentation, is all the required CEP documentation maintained on file? So what documentation are we going to be looking at? So the enrollment data. So we want to see complete student enrollment list from April 1st of the CEP enrollment year, certification documents, and claiming percentages. So what can you do now to prepare for this part of the review? Is organize your data and organize your documents. Make sure you have that enrollment list available, and make sure you have those certification documents available. Another thing you can do is just confirm your claiming percentages. Look at your claims and make sure that the claiming percentages being applied are accurate. Okay, so the next part of the review that we'll be looking at is meal counting and claiming. So during this part of the review, we're looking at your meal counting and claiming system. So how do you count meals at the point of service? We're looking at accurate submission of claims. So how do you submit for reimbursement? We're looking at your internal controls. So do you have edit checks? How are you ensuring that your meal counts are not exceeding enrollment? And then meal charging. What is your meal charging policy? So documentation that we will be looking for is your meal counting procedures, your daily meal counts, your daily edit checks, and your meal charging policy. Things that you can do to prepare now is ensure edit checks are in place. So if you're using an electronic system should produce an edit check for you. But if you're using a manual tracking system, there are edit check templates that you can utilize if you need one. Review your charging policy. And most importantly, observe your point of sale. Make sure there's someone at the end of the line tracking students as they leave the line with a reimbursable meal. Make sure students are taking a reimbursable meal. If you're offer versus serve, make sure the proper offer versus serve rules are being applied. If you're straight serve, make sure the student is getting all components on their tray. And then make sure you have an accurate system in place for tracking students by their eligibility. Next is meal pattern compliance. So what are we reviewing when we look at your meal pattern? So we want to make sure all the required components are being offered with each meal. We're also looking at daily and weekly minimums. So our daily and weekly minimum portion sizes being provided for each grade group. And then offer versus serve. If you're offer versus serve, are students selecting the complete reimbursable meal? Documentation that we'll be looking at are your production records, food labels, child nutrition labels, product formulation statements, and standardized recipes. What you can do to prepare now is make sure that all your sites have complete production records for all meals. Start collecting and organizing labels. Make sure you have food labels, nutrition facts labels, CN labels for all menu items, and then utilize standardized recipes, create, maintain, and use standardized recipes for all multi-ingredient menu items. So the next part of the review is resource management, and I am going to have Catherine jump in to explain resource management and procurement.
Thanks, Claire. I appreciate it. So as Claire mentioned earlier in the timeline of the review, we like to kick this portion off with that financial review call. Resource management is a risk-based assessment, and it starts with a list of questions. And half of the battle to resource management is understanding what those questions are actually asking and how they pertain to your, local organization. And so that financial review call, as Claire mentioned, it's really important. We highly recommend that anybody that is involved in the financials related to food service are involved in this call. It helps everybody stay on the same page and hear the same information and know, what's required and help provide responses on this. But we like to go through this, explain those questions, any answers that you have, we'll go ahead and make note of, and then we send a follow-up afterwards that includes exactly what documents will be needed from you. A big thing to note on resource management is that we are looking at prior year. So we are looking at school year 22-23 for resource management. So a lot of what Claire is going over with you in the general review areas are current year. But when we talk resource management and procurement, we are looking at school year 22-23. So when we go through those questions on the call, that is that initial risk assessment. Sometimes you'll hear it called the risk assessment. Sometimes you'll hear it called the 700 series questions. But we will go through those with you on that call. If there's any answers that you already know, then we'll make note of those. Otherwise, we'll send you what we have from the call and give you some time to obtain the rest of the answers, gather your documents that support those answers, and get those in. And then based on your responses to those initial questions, there may be additional questions and documents needed in additional sections. And we call those comprehensive reviews. And so some people panic when they hear comprehensive review. That doesn't necessarily mean that something is done incorrectly. So for example, if you say that you sell something outside of, or if you provide something outside of not or reimbursable meals, if you have a la carte, anything like that, we automatically ask a few additional questions and need additional documents related to that. So don't panic if you hear something called a comprehensive review and you may not have any. So some sponsors have no comprehensive reviews and some have comprehensive reviews in multiple areas. And so we will let you know that after those initial responses are received to that resource management risk assessment. The documents will kind of work in phases as well. So with that initial financial review call that will go through those questions in the 700 series with that risk assessment, we do need documents that support the answers given. So we will need a detailed general ledger. I know that sometimes we might call a report something different than what you all may call it locally in your system. And so go ahead and, start looking at those reports locally, but really that detailed general ledger is a report of all of the transactions in and out of food service last year. We'll need a statement of revenues and expenditures. We'll need a balance sheet as of this past June. And then some of these other items may or may not apply to you. And so after that financial review call, as I mentioned, we will send you a follow-up email and it will have a more tailored list of documents. So you will get an initial checklist of documents from that senior review specialist that Claire mentioned earlier, but it is just generic documents. So after that call, for example, if adults, are not able to purchase meals locally, then there's nothing that we would need adult meal pricing related. So the financial reports are overall, we will need them. The documents underneath that vary based on your responses and kind of how you operate locally. And then comprehensive review documents, I would not worry about those right now. I just like to give people a heads up of when we say additional documents, what kind of documents those may be. So again, going back to that example of if you sell a la carte, then we'll ask a few additional questions and we will need to see where you assess compliance with your revenue from non-programs foods. So oftentimes we need that tool. If you have indirect costs, then we'll have to have supporting documents of indirect cost charge. So those documents vary. We will give you a list. You don't have to worry about those comprehensive review documents right now. I just don't like surprises. And so I like to give you a heads up of what's to come. As far as preparing now, what can you do? With the financial documents being for your prior school year, I highly encourage you to go ahead and figure out what that report is called locally. I know sometimes reports have to be built in the software if it's not exactly what's needed. So I do encourage you to go ahead and pull those financial documents, start figuring out what you need on there. And then read through that risk assessment. So again, that's what we go through on that financial review call. And so by all means, we will explain what those questions mean on the call, but it's nice for you to read through just so that you know what's to come in that call and you kind of know the agenda for the call. And some of those answers, again, you'll already have and you'll know exactly what they're asking for. And some you'll need clarification on the call, and that's fine. But those questions we will, the senior review specialist will send an administrative review resource guide, and it'll be an attachment to that email that they will send you. And it's kind of a tips and tricks for each section of the review. And so in resource management, it has those questions as well as, what does this question mean that we'll talk about on that financial review call. So read through those questions and share them with the others that will need to be on that call, which brings me to my last point on resource management of gathering your team. So for some organizations, it really is, one person that does all of this, and that can be the person on the financial review call. But more often than not, resource management related to food service involves multiple people. So it might involve a business manager or a bookkeeper or a manager or food service director. And so letting all of those people know that, hey, this review is coming and these document requests are coming, and then getting them on that initial phone call really does help to have everybody on the same page from the beginning of the review. And I know everybody on this call and everybody, within your local LEA you all wear multiple hats and you have a lot on your plate. So just letting everybody know that this is going on can help people plan accordingly for the timeline of the review. So Claire, if we can switch to procurement, pretty please. Awesome. Thank you. So procurement again is for last year. And whereas resource management is looking at like revenues and expenses and adult meal prices and, making sure that you're pricing non-program foods accordingly and more of the financials, procurement is looking at how did food service get to the vendor that they used. And so again, we're looking at school year 22-23, and this will be related to vendors used out of that nonprofit school food service account. So on that initial financial review call, we will go over the procurement tool. And that procurement tool essentially drives the whole review. And so that's why we go over it in the call, is there are a few nuances to completing that tool. And we want to make sure that we get it right from the start. Because if we have information incorrectly reported in that tool, then we run the risk of coming back to you later and saying we need additional vendor information, or we run the risk of having asked you for information that was not needed for the review. And so we don't want to cause you more work where it's not needed. So on here, we'll complete that procurement tool. And the best way to complete that procurement tool, and it's something you can start working on now, is what we refer to, you'll see it in documents for step 1. We refer to it as a vendor paid list. And I know that often that's not what it is called locally. Sometimes it's a check history, sometimes it's a vendor history, but really it is a list of vendors that Child Nutrition used for goods and services last year, 22-23. And it includes the total paid to those vendors, but it's also almost a breakdown. So, here's the vendor that we spent $50,000 with, and here are, the 4 checks that make that up. So it's the vendor and the total paid, and kind of that breakdown for each vendor. And that is what you'll use to complete that procurement tool. Also, we will ask for in that step 1 procurement procedures and procurement code of conduct for last year. And that all is step 1 with the procurement review. I like to give people a heads up that there is a back and forth process in there. So step 1 is us receiving these documents, and then validating them. So again, we want to make sure that tool is correct. Your financial review specialist will likely reach out to you with questions just to confirm that that table is correct and what we're seeing, all validates and checks out. And once we get to that point of everything's validated, everything checks out, we will do what we call vendor selection. So don't feel like at all that you need to go start pulling all purchases and all documentation for all vendors of last year. USDA has selection criteria that tells us the number and types of vendors that we have to select. And so we will use that. We'll perform vendor selection, and then we will give you a checklist of exactly what documents were requested for which vendors on there. And so don't pull all of your documents now. That'll come to you in a checklist. And then we'll give you time to submit those documents. And then that financial review specialist will look through them. Again, they might have questions. The tough part in procurement is understanding the local process. So, can you explain how you did this? And so if they come back to you with those questions, that'll be needed to complete those review forms on our end. As far as the type of documents that might be requested, again, I will remind you, don't pull all of these, but for micro purchase vendors, invoices and receipts, for small purchase vendors, those vendors that you obtain by, getting quotes, we would need specifications, quotes, and then the specified invoices and receipts. And then for formal, we'll need, your invitation for bid, RFP, kind of the whole process of bid on there. And so again, we will let you know what's needed. So as far as preparing now, the big thing is determining those procurement methods. So on there, we will need to know, did you get quotes? Did you get bids? And that sort of thing. So go ahead and start determining now, how did we procure this vendor? Because that can take some time if you weren't already tracking it. And so figuring out, yes, we used a bid to get this vendor, or, yes, we use quotes. Go ahead and add that to your vendor paid list so that when you go to complete that tool, then you have that information. And then again, gather your team. This could be the same people involved in resource management. It may be different people. And so again, letting them know that this is coming is very helpful in the long run, especially when we talk about having to pull all of these, prior procurement documents. And so letting them know and getting them on that financial review call is really, really, really important in the process. So Claire, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Catherine. All right, moving on here. Let's see. The next area we're going to look at is civil rights. So when we're looking at civil rights, we're making sure that your program is in compliance with the civil rights requirements. So do participants know what their rights are? So do you have those Injustice for All posters, posted so that participants, students, the school community knows what their rights are? Do you have a procedure for handling civil rights complaints? And then staff training. Do staff know what their responsibilities are working within a federal school lunch program? And did they get their annual civil rights training? Documents that we'll be looking at are your public media release. We'll be looking at program materials to make sure they have the most current non-discrimination statement. We'll be looking at your civil rights complaint procedures. We'll be looking at medical statements for students with special dietary needs. So for this part, you know, if a student has a dietary restriction and a modification needs to be made to the meal, we just want to make sure that there is a medical statement on file, stating, you know, what the dietary restriction is and what modifications need to be made. And then lastly, we will be looking at documentation of the civil rights training for staff. How you can start to prepare now, check out your Injustice for All posters, make sure they're up at your POS and make sure they're the most current. Check all your materials for the most current non-discrimination statement. So check your website, check any materials that go home to families. Implement a complaint procedure. So just make sure you have a complaint procedure in place. Make sure your staff understand how to deal with a civil rights complaint. And then ensure staff have had their annual civil rights training. Make sure you have the documentation on file to show that that training occurred for the current school year. Okay, next is on-site monitoring. If you are a single site sponsor, you are not required to do on-site monitoring. On-site monitoring is only necessary for those sites, for multi-site sponsors. So when we're looking at the on-site monitoring, we want to make sure there's adequate program oversight. So are you monitoring each of your programs? And we're also reviewing, was the on-site monitoring completed in the correct time frame? So every year on-site monitoring has to occur by February 1st. So the documentation that we will be looking at is the completed on-site monitoring forms. And if there are any findings from the on-site monitoring, we want to see that corrective action or follow-up. So what you can do now to prepare, if you have not done on-site monitoring yet, just get it done by February 1st. And then just, if you've done on-site monitoring, review your forms for completeness, make sure they're signed, make sure that if there was any corrective action, that site was brought into compliance. All right, next is the local wellness policy. So when we review the local wellness policy, we're looking at your policy to make sure it contains, you know, all the required language, and we're checking to see if your local wellness policy is being implemented. We're also checking for ongoing evaluation of your local wellness policy. Does it support current sponsor practices? Is the policy being implemented? Is the public aware of the policy and implementation? So documentation that we're going to be requesting is your most current wellness policy, documentation of review and updates of the wellness policy, and then your most recent wellness policy assessment. So how you can start to prepare now, look over your wellness policy, make sure it has all the required language, and ensure your local wellness policy is available to the public. So, you know, most sponsors just have a link to their wellness policy on their website. I think the best place to put this is the food service. If you have a food service page on your website, I would just post it there. Just make sure it's accessible and it's not buried somewhere on the website. You want the school community to be able to find it easily. All right, so Smart Snacks. So when we're looking at Smart Snacks, we're looking at those additional food items, so those a la carte items that you're selling outside of the reimbursable school meals. When we're making sure that those food items that you're selling at your school are compliant with Smart Snacks. So just as a reminder, any food sold during the school day has to be Smart Snack compliant. And the school day is defined as the midnight before to 30 minutes after the end of the school day. We're also going to be looking at exempt fundraisers. So how are you tracking these fundraisers? And exempt fundraisers, basically, this is a flexibility that allows schools to hold a certain number of fundraisers where the food sold within those fundraisers does not have to meet Smart Snack regulations. And I believe PED allows one exempt fundraiser per semester per school. So the documentation that we'll be looking for are the labels for all snack and beverage items sold in the school. We'll be looking at those Smart Snack calculator results pages, and then any exempt fundraising documentation. So how you can start to prepare now is talk to school officials. If you have any school stores, make sure that everything sold within those school stores is Smart Snack compliant. Check your vending machine, check any items you're selling on the line, make sure they're compliant. All right, next is professional standards. So when we're looking at professional standards, we're making sure that all of your employees are getting the annual training that is required. Training hours vary by job title. So we want to make sure that your staff are getting that annual training, and we want to see how you are tracking and meeting those requirements. We'll also be checking hiring standards for the food service director. So we want to see documentation that supports the hiring standards. So documentation that we'll be looking for, rosters of all food service employees, your completed professional standards training tracker, any training documents, so certificates, sign-in sheets, that sort of thing, and then documents to support the hiring of the food service director. How you can start to prepare now. If your staff have not met their annual training hours, just make sure you have a plan in place to meet those training hours for the school year. And just get organized. Make sure you have all your training certificates in order and your training tracker is up to date. So the next part that we'll be reviewing is food safety. So when we're reviewing food safety, we're looking at your food safety practices within your school. So the first thing we'll review is your safety plan. So does your food safety plan meet HACCP criteria? Is it up to date? Are your staff aware of the food safety plan? Is it being implemented? We're also going to be looking at health inspections. So did you contact the local health department to request 2 health inspections for the school year? We'll be looking to make sure your health inspection report, your most recent, is posted in a visible area in the food service area. We'll also be looking at food storage, so your dry storage area, your coolers, your freezers, just to make sure food is stored properly and at safe temperatures. So documentation that we'll be looking at are your health inspection reports, your food safety plan, and any temperature logs for storage areas. How you can start to prepare now, just look over your HACCP plan, make sure it's updated, make sure it's in an accessible location in the kitchen. It shouldn't be, locked in a closet or locked in a drawer or down the hall. It needs to be somewhere where your staff can access it. If you have not called the health department yet to request health inspections, make sure you do so. And then just make sure your most recent health inspection is posted in a visible area in the food service area. Okay, so next up is Buy American. So simply put, the Buy American provision is in place to ensure that sponsors are purchasing domestic agricultural products whenever possible. If for some reason a non-domestic item needs to be purchased, there needs to be exception documentation on file. So we will, when we do our kitchen walkthrough, we will be, checking your pantries to make sure that, you're only buying domestic products. And if there are non-domestic products, we want to make sure those that exception documentation is on file. So what you can start to do to prepare is check your products, check your produce packaging. A lot of times where we see this is in the dry storage area. A lot canned items, you know, things like fruit cocktail, mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks tend to be non-domestic. So just make sure if you have those in your pantry, make sure you have exception documentation on file. If you don't, you can always contact your food distributor. Most of the time they can provide you with the documentation you need for those items. So program outreach. So if you are operating the school breakfast program, you have to let families know, you know, at least quarterly that the breakfast program is available. So this could be as simple as, you know, posting your breakfast menu on the school website, putting something on Facebook to remind families that breakfast is being offered, but there has to be some sort of outreach, you know, on a regular basis to remind families of the program. And then summer food service program outreach. So whether you operate summer food service or not, sponsors are required to let families know where they can find meals during the summer. So at the end of the school year, it could be a flyer that you post on Facebook. It could be a link to the USDA summer food service map that you post on your website. But there has to be some sort of summer food service program outreach. So documentation that we'll be looking at, just the school breakfast program reminder materials and the summer food service program outreach materials. So just make sure these are organized and set aside for the review. So if you operate the after school snack program, we will also be doing a review of the after school snack program. So when we are looking at your program, we are making sure that snacks meet the snack meal pattern requirements. We're also making sure that education and enrichment activities are part of your snack service. And then we're looking at counting and claiming. So are you maintaining accurate snack counts? So documentation we'll be looking at are snack production records, snack daily meal counts, and snack monitoring forms. So if you've not conducted monitoring yet, that should be conducted now. And then you could prepare by just observing your service. Just make sure that snack counts are being counted accurately. Make sure production records are being maintained. Next is the special milk program. So if you operate the special milk program, what we'll be reviewing is your pricing policy. So are you charging for milk appropriately? We'll be looking at your counting and claiming procedures. So are you adequately and accurately counting milk served? And then service procedures. Are you serving to eligible participants? So documentation that we will need are your daily milk counts, milk order documentation, pricing policy and participant eligibility documents. And what you can start to do to prepare is organize your records and again, observe service. Make sure that everything that is happening is compliant. Next is the fresh fruit and vegetable program. So if you operate the fresh fruit and vegetable program, we will be reviewing this program while we are on site. What we're reviewing for the fresh fruit and vegetable program is we'll be doing claim validation. So are all costs allowable and supported? We'll be looking at your fresh fruit and vegetable program service. So is service occurring per requirements? So just a couple things to keep in mind. The fresh fruit and vegetable program should be occurring outside of breakfast and lunch meals. Are the appropriate foods being served? So really it should be fresh fruit and vegetables. You're allowed to serve one cooked vegetable per week if it's in conjunction with a educational activity. And you are allowed to serve vegetables with low fat or non-fat dip. But it really should just be fresh fruits and vegetables, so no canned, frozen, or highly processed fruits and vegetables. You should only be serving to program adults. So adults that assist with the fresh fruit and vegetable program are allowed to participate, but it shouldn't be open to all staff within the school community. And then you want to make sure your fresh fruit and vegetable program is being promoted. So, it could be as simple as a flyer, on a bulletin board or something posted on Facebook or your website. But this program should be promoted to the school community. And then again, items served, we want to make sure all items being served are allowable. What we'll be looking at are invoices for produce and supplies, and then we'll be looking at service documentation. So what you can do to prepare now is set aside invoices, and again, observe service, see what's going on, make sure that everyone's on the same page, and that the program is being run in a compliant way. Okay. Before we wrap things up, I just want to talk about communication. So like I said, your senior review specialist is your main point of contact throughout the entire administrative review process. All of you will be assigned a senior review specialist, and you will hear from your senior review specialist in the next couple weeks. You will have 3 planned phone calls. So you'll have your introduction call, your financial call, and your on-site preparation call. But you can call your senior review specialist at any time throughout the review process. Your senior review specialist will also be sending summarizing emails for any phone calls. They'll also be sending information request forms via email. So just make sure you have your senior review specialist email saved to your favorites or in your address book, just so that their emails don't land in your spam folder. And then questions. So like I said, you can call or email your senior review specialist anytime with any questions or concerns throughout the entire review process. Again, we are here to support you and guide you through this process. We want to make it as painless as possible. So please utilize your senior review specialist as a resource, and don't be afraid to call or email with questions. Okay, so that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for listening. Like I said, a link to this recorded training will be sent with your notification letter. And we will be typing up any questions that were put in the chat, if there are any, into a Q&A document to send out to everyone that's on the call. But again, thank you for being part of the webinar today. And we do have time for questions, so if you want to come off mute, you can ask questions or you can put them in the chat.
That's good.
If you don't have a question, feel free to hop off the call, but Catherine and I will stay on if anyone has a question. Again, feel free to put it in the chat.
Claire, one question just came in that says, if you use an FSMC, how does that affect the process?
Typically with a food service management company, we are still working directly with the sponsor for the review. A lot of times the food service management company may, supply things for the menu review, but typically we deal with the food service director at the district level.
Hi, sorry, that was my question, and I wanted to follow up a little bit on that about FSMC. Like the part where, you have to provide invoices for your vendors and the Buy American and things like that. I mean, obviously, that's something that the FSMC handles. Do we need to get those sorts of things from them?
Yeah,
I can, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, Catherine.
I was gonna say, I can kind of speak to a couple of those. So for the FSMC, it will depend. Do you all have fixed price contract or cost reimbursable contract?
Fixed price.
Okay, so for a fixed price, what will happen is we will select specific invoices with your FSNC that you all paid to them. And so since you're fixed price, it's not like we need their food invoices and that sort of thing. It'll just be what's paid to them. And then if Child Nutrition paid any other vendors, then we would need the invoices for other vendors paid. But not necessarily like their food invoices that they use to make those meals for you all. And then as far as like Buy American and that sort of thing, all of their requirements still apply. And so, if the reviewer is on site and they walk in the storeroom and there's, non-domestic items, you do still need those justification forms on file locally for those items.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for providing clarification so we could help answer it better.
Sorry, I have another question. One of my reviews is for a new SFA. So obviously my financial documents and everything, I'm not going to have anything from last year because it's a brand new school and that's why I'm having the AR. How does that work? So I can prepare my business managers.
Great question. We will get a specific list from the state. Usually, obviously, it can't be, looking at a full year of documents. But usually there are certain things that, depending upon when your review takes place, there's kind of like an abbreviated list of what we will need from you just to make sure that things are correctly being done in the current year. And so we will work on getting that list from the state, and we can, if we don't have it before the Q&A, can you just put your sponsor name in the chat so that we can make sure, if that takes a little bit longer, that we can get you that guidance?
Awesome. I'm typing it now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So
Got
yeah,
it.
I'm having two ARs. One
Lucky
for my
you.
lucky me. One for my brand new SFA and one for an established one. And so they both use the same FSMC. One serves breakfast, one doesn't, things like one's new, one's not. My established one, I don't know the last time they had an AR. It was before I started. And so I don't know if I'm going to have any documentation from the previous one. Would I maybe get that from the state perhaps?
We can work and check. There are record keeping requirements that technically those are still supposed to be on file during the life of the contract. So I
Mhm.
would say that, once you get that list of documents, if you look locally, and you can't find it or something like that, then we can kind of work with the state. The original contract they likely have because the state approves that. But other than that, they wouldn't have the advertisements and all of that. So we'll work with you on that list of documents. We'll see what we can get, but just, for moving forward, just know that there are record keeping requirements. And so for, the life of an FSMC contract, if it's, 1+4 renewals, that original documentation should be on file through the end of that contract on there. But we'll work with you, let us know, and then we'll try to help and pull what we can, just, so that you have it moving forward.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure the last AR was probably, pre-COVID.
Oh, yes,
Um,
sure.
and so it was, when we were much smaller and things were a lot different for us than, as a charter school. So I just want to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row. I'm,
Absolutely.
I'm very new to this position and still learning a lot. So,
Well, and that's part of the review process is to, help you learn, leave you better than we found you. And so, if there are issues along the way, everything is fixable. That's what I tell people is that it should be like a learning and teaching experience. It's not a gotcha or anything like that. If we aren't learning from each other, then, I think that we can do a better job.
I love that, philosophy. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Sorry, you said we'll get a recording of this with our, AR notification letter. I thought I already got the AR notification letter, so,
So I think you got our welcome email.
okay,
And then somebody reached out, or one of our admin reached out to just confirm a week of the week of on-site review, just to make sure there were no conflicts. So you will, once you have your introduction call, we'll send the official notification letter, and we'll
okay.
include the link to this webinar.
So, this is a little bit of personal information, but, I had talked to, I think it was Kaylin who reached out to me.
Yes, yep,
And so, uh, I'm actually in, treatment for cancer right now.
okay.
And when the PED originally scheduled my ARs, they scheduled it for like May, as far out as possible, so I could kind of get through everything before I, had to tackle this.
Mm-hmm.
But the welcome letter, was saying that it was going to be in March instead. And so she was going to check with someone to see if it would be possible to move it a little later or not, or at least start getting me on in the process a little sooner with gathering documentation and the calls and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that way, I had a little more time to kind of get things all together. But I never heard anything further regarding that.
So we can, I can look at the schedule and see if there's any flexibility in moving the reviews. The other thing that we can do is we could schedule your introduction call earlier so
Okay.
that you can get, the documentation checklist and everything that you need to get started with the review.
Yes.
I have a feeling that doing the intro call earlier will be a little bit easier than trying to shift the review week.
Okay.
But I will look into it, and I will have somebody follow up with you. But I'll make sure somebody reaches out to you sooner rather than later to get you, squared away so you can start uploading docs and getting things, situated on your end.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Sorry, I
Yeah,
know
you're
that was
welcome.
kind of personal, but
No, thanks for sharing. Are there any other questions? Anything we can help anybody with? Okay, if there are no other questions, then we will end things, but look out for an email from your senior review specialist. They'll be in touch in the next couple weeks to have that introduction call with you and get you situated with the initial steps of your administrative review. So thank you again for your time. And we will be, again, sending this recorded webinar with your notification letter. So thank you all and have a great day.